The Arizona Territory in 1870 was a place of fine red dust that got into everything. It settled in the creases of your skin, coated your tongue, and worked its way into the seams of clothes that had been packed away in trunks, smelling of Boston cedar and old lavender. Josephine Monroe, who had been Mrs. Alistair Finch for 4 miserable years and a widow for 6 scandalous months, tasted that grit on her teeth and felt it grinding under her eyelids. The stagecoach, a bone-rattling contraption of bleached wood and cracked leather, finally lurched to a halt, its axles screaming in protest. She had been traveling for weeks, first by train, then by this agonizing wagon, moving further and further from civilization and closer to the raw, sun-baked edge of the world. She was in exile. Back in Boston, the whispers had become a roar. Her late husband, Alistair, a man twice her age with a fondness for brandy and bad investments, had left her with nothing but a mountain of debt and a name nobody wanted to touch. Then came the senator. He had been married. Of course, he had offered comfort, which soon became leverage. When she had refused his final, indecent proposal to settle her husband's accounts, the rumors of her scandalous behavior and moral looseness had bloomed overnight. Her father, Colonel James Monroe, a man who valued his military reputation above all else, had wasted no time. A letter arrived, terse and cold. She was not invited. She was summoned. She was to come west, to Fort Determination, where her indiscretions could not tarnish his name in polite society. Josie stepped down from the coach, her legs weak, her green traveling suit, once the height of fashion, was stained with sweat and alkali dust. She did not bother to straighten her hat. The fort was not a fort. It was a miserable collection of tents, half-finished adobe structures, and a single, ugly wooden headquarters, all gathered around a patch of beaten earth that served as a parade ground. The flag hung limp in the oppressive heat. "Josephine!" Her father stood on the porch of the headquarters. He did not move toward her. He was a tall man, ramrod straight, his blue uniform immaculate despite the grime. His face was weathered, but his eyes were the same cold gray she remembered from her childhood. "Father," she said, her voice dry, "you will be quartered in the officers' auxiliary tents. Your trunks will be brought." He did not ask about her journey. He did not offer her water. "We have an arrangement for you, a task suitable to your station." "A task?" Josie forced a small, brittle laugh. "I thought I was here to be hidden, like a lunatic ant." The colonel's eyes narrowed. "You are here to make yourself useful. Josephine, you will report to Mrs. Gable tomorrow at dawn. You have been assigned to the education of the Apache children." Josie felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "Educating whom?" "We have several children from the Chiricahua bands. We are teaching them manners, hygiene, and the English tongue. We are, in short, civilizing them. It seems a fitting occupation for someone who has so recently forgotten her own civility." He turned on his heel and went inside, leaving her standing in the brutal, white sunlight. The school was a long, low tent that smelled of unwashed bodies and fear. The children, ranging in age from perhaps 5 to 12, sat on the dirt floor staring at her with huge, black, unreadable eyes. They had been taken from their villages. Rescued, her father called it, after skirmishes. They were hostages, and she was their keeper. For a week, Josie went through the motions. She tried to teach them please and thank you. She tried to show them how to use a fork. They stared through her, silent and watchful. She was a ghost to them, and they were ghosts to her. She was a prisoner just as they were. The community gathering was held to bolster morale among the settlers and traders. It was a desperate affair in the main mess hall, the air thick with the smell of cheap whiskey, cigar smoke, and roasted meat. A few soldiers sawed away at fiddles, producing a sound like cats being strangled. Josie sat alone at a rough-hewn table, a tin cup of whiskey in her hand. It was raw stuff, burning its way down her throat, but it was blissfully numbing. She watched the other women, the officers' wives, clad in limp calico, their faces drawn tight from the heat and the constant, low-grade fear. They clustered together, whispering behind their fans, occasionally casting venomous looks her way. They knew exactly who she was. The Scarlet Woman, the Colonel's shame. A group of traitors, loud and beefy men smelling of buffalo hide and greed, sat nearby. They were laughing about the recent troubles with the Apache. "Monroe's got 'em spooked," one man bragged. "They won't dare show their faces near the pass again." "Spooked, maybe," said another, wiping his beard. "But Taza is still out there. That one he is not spooked. He is just quiet, and quiet is worse." "Taza!" the first man spat. "He is just one man. What is he going to do? His warband is broken. He just sulks in the hills." Josie took another long swallow of the whiskey. The room was spinning slightly. She felt a familiar, reckless bitterness rising in her. She was sick of these men. She was sick of the judgmental women. She was sick of this entire God-forsaken pile of dust. She wanted to say something that would crack the smugness in their faces. She stood up, a little unsteadily, and raised her cup. "Here is to Taza," she announced, her voice carrying across the sudden lull in the music. The traders looked at her, amused. "They say he is a great war chief," Josie continued, the alcohol making her bold. "A real terror. But I have seen these silent, brooding men before. They are all thunder and no rain." She smiled, a sharp, broken smile. "I bet the Apache chief's no good in bed." The words hung in the air, stark and ugly. The fiddle music stopped. The whispers of the wives ceased. Even the clink of glasses from the bar went quiet. A profound, suffocating silence fell over the room. Josie's smile wavered. "What?" she asked. "Is it something I said?" A traitor, his face pale, slowly raised a finger and pointed just behind her. Josie turned. He was standing not 10 feet away, near the doorway, where he had been observing the gathering with 2 other Apache envoys. They were here under armed watch, part of some tense, ongoing negotiation for trade access. He was tall, taller than her father, and built with a lean, hard grace. He wore buckskin trousers and a simple cotton shirt, not the feathers and paint of her imagination. His black hair was long, held back by a simple band, but it was his face that held her. It was all harsh angles and shadows, dominated by a strong, straight nose and a wide, firm mouth. His eyes were fixed on her. They were not angry. They were not surprised. They were dead. They were as cold and empty as a winter sky. This was Taza. Josie's blood ran cold. The mortification was so intense it sobered her instantly. She had just publicly mocked this man, this leader, in the most personal, degrading way possible, in front of her own people and his. Taza held her gaze for 1, 2, 3 long seconds. The contempt radiating from him was a physical force, a wall of ice. He did not speak. He did not make a gesture. He simply turned, his movements economical and fluid, and walked out of the mess hall, followed by his 2 companions. The room exhaled. The fiddle player, sweating, quickly struck up a frantic, terrible tune. Josie stared at the empty doorway, her heart hammering against her ribs. She wanted to run. She wanted to be sick. Instead, she turned back to the bar, her face a mask of porcelain indifference. "Well," she said, her voice shaking only slightly, "pour me another. It seems I have ruined the party." She hid her shame behind more bravado, drinking until the room was a blur and the faces of the settlers were just pale, judgmental moons, but she could not erase the image of his eyes. Later that night, she stumbled back to her tent. It was pitched at the edge of the officers' row. Isolated, she fumbled with the flap, her fingers thick and clumsy. It was not the wind that woke her. It was the sound of ripping canvas, a sound like a dull blade tearing through sailcloth. She sat bolt upright, her head pounding. The tent was collapsing on her. She screamed, tangling herself in the heavy canvas and the blankets. She fought her way out, gasping, into the cold night air. The tent was in ribbons, the guide rope slashed, and piled neatly just inside the ruined entrance. Where she would have stepped on it was a large, steaming heap of horse dung. Josie stared at it, the smell sharp and foul. This was not a warrior's attack. This was not the Apache. This was not Taza's revenge. She knew, with chilling certainty, who had done this. She had heard the faint sound of suppressed, feminine giggling as they ran off. The wives, the proper civilized ladies of Fort Determination. She sank to her knees in the dust, the ruined canvas around her. She was a pawn. Her father used her for his shame. The settlers and traders saw her as a spectacle. The officers' wives saw her as trash to be disposed of. And the Apache saw her as a fool. She began to laugh, a dry, ragged sound that turned into a sob. She was resented on all sides. And she was utterly, completely alone. Miles away. Taza rode into his encampment. It was nestled deep in a canyon, hidden by cottonwoods and sheer rock. This was not a war camp. It was a place of families, of children playing in the moonlight, of old women tending fires that smelled of cedar and roasting corn. He dismounted, his body stiff. He was boiling inside. The woman's words echoed in his head, a biting, meaningless insult. It was not the words themselves. They were the babbling of a drunk. It was the laughter of the white men. It was the public display. It was the humiliation in a place where he had come under a flag of truce. A truce he already despised. His people saw his face. The young warriors gathered, their expressions hard. "She mocked you, Taza," one said. His name, Hania. "She mocked all of us." The white soldiers laughed. "We must answer this." "An eye for an eye," another muttered. "They poison our wells. We burn their hay." Taza looked at the fire, his face stoic. "No," he said. "No?" Hania stepped forward, incredulous. "They shame us, and we do nothing?" "She is the colonel's daughter. An attack on her would be an attack on him. It would be a strong message." "It would be a stupid message," Taza said, his voice low and hard as stone. "It would be the message he wants. He wants us to break the treaty. He wants a reason to bring his soldiers into this canyon." He turned to Hania, his eyes burning with a cold fire. "And for what? For the words of a drunken woman. I will not lead your brothers to their graves over an insult." Taza walked away from them, toward the small wickiup where he slept alone. He sat, pulling a blanket around his shoulders. Though the night was not cold, he did not want retaliation. He just wanted no more death. He had seen enough death to last 10 lifetimes. He closed his eyes, but all he could see was his brother. The memory was sharp, a piece of glass in his heart. It had been a year ago. Naka, his younger brother, barely 19, full of fire and hope. Naka had believed the white men, believed in the peace talks. Colonel Monroe had requested the meeting. He had sworn on his God that it was for peace. Taza had argued against it. He had warned Naka that the white man's tongue was forked, that their treaties were traps. But Naka, desperate for an end to the running, had gone. Taza and his warriors had waited on the ridge, watching. The peace talk had lasted an hour. Then the blue-coated soldiers had seized Naka. They had not shot him. That would have been too quick. They had dragged him to a large cottonwood tree, a tree the Apache held sacred, and they had hanged him. They left him there for 3 days, a warning. Taza had been the one to cut him down. The rope had bitten deep into his brother's neck. The look of surprise and betrayal was still frozen on Naka's face. Since that day, Taza had withdrawn. He had lost his faith in peace, but he had also lost his thirst for vengeance. Vengeance just meant more bodies to bury, more women weeping, more children with no fathers. He was a war chief who would not make war. He was a leader frozen by his own grief, and his people were starving. And now, The man who had hanged his brother had sent his daughter, a woman with a sharp tongue and sad, reckless eyes, to pour salt on the wound. Josie, meanwhile, was given her punishment. Her father did not mention her ruined tent or her behavior at the party. He simply informed her that she was to oversee a supply delivery into the hills. "Trooper Evans will escort you," the colonel said, not looking up from his maps. "Mr. Pike will translate. The wagon is for the mining prospectors north of the canyon. You will ensure they sign the inventories." It was a transparently dangerous assignment. Sending a lone green trooper and an old, half-drunk translator into the canyons was a fool's errand. It was punishment. Her father was reminding her that her life was his to risk. Josie merely nodded. "Yes, sir." She put her hair up, put on the most practical skirt she owned, and mounted the horse they gave her. Trooper Evans, a boy of perhaps 17 with pale fuzz on his cheeks, looked terrified. Mr. Pike, the translator, was already sipping from a flask. The first day was grueling. The sun beat down, and the canyon walls seemed to lean in on them, radiating heat. The only sound was the plodding of the horses and the creak of the wagon. On the second day, the sky changed. The brilliant, clear blue turned a sickly, brassy yellow. The air became heavy, still, and charged. "Smells like rain," Pike muttered, looking nervously at the sky. "There are no clouds," Trooper Evans said, wiping his forehead. "You do not need clouds, boy," Pike said. "Out here, the rain comes from nowhere, and it comes all at once." They were in a narrow canyon, following the floor of a dry riverbed. An arroyo. It was the easiest path for the wagon, but Josie felt a prickle of unease. The walls were steep on both sides. It began without warning, not a drizzle, but a roar. It was not just the sound of rain, it was the sound of a train, of thunder, of the mountains themselves coming down. A wall of brown, churning water appeared at the bend of the canyon, moving faster than a galloping horse. "Flood!" Pike screamed. "Get to high ground! Get up the walls!" But there was no time. The water hit the wagon first, lifting the massive wooden structure like a toy and smashing it against the canyon wall. Pike and the mules disappeared beneath the torrent. Trooper Evans grabbed for Josie's reins. "Mrs. Finch, this way!" His horse reared, eyes white with terror, as the water slammed into its legs. The boy was thrown, his head striking a jagged piece of rock with a sickening crack. He went under and did not come back up. Josie's horse panicked, turning and trying to scramble up the slick rock face. It lost its footing. Josie was thrown from the saddle, hitting the water hard. The cold shocked the breath from her lungs. She was tumbled head over heels, dragged by the current, debris striking her body. Her heavy skirt was a shroud, pulling her down. She fought, gagging on the muddy water, her arms and legs flailing. She managed to grab a branch of a submerged mesquite tree, clinging to it as the world roared around her. Her arm felt like it was being ripped from its socket. The branch snapped. She was washed further down, her lungs burning. She saw the sky, then mud, then sky. She was drowning. This was it. This was the end. A stupid, dirty end in a muddy ditch. Her body slammed into something solid, a sandbar, perhaps, or a pile of debris. She was out of the main current. She lay half in, half out of the water, coughing, vomiting mud. Her left arm was useless, a fire of agony blazing from her shoulder. The rain was still falling, a cold, miserable sheet. She tried to move, to crawl further up the bank, but she had no strength. She lay there, half drowned, shivering, her vision fading. Through the gray curtain of rain, she saw a figure. He was on the bank just above her, sitting on a black horse, perfectly still. He was watching her. She blinked, trying to clear the mud from her eyes. It was Taza. He was looking down at her, his face impossible to read, the water running off the brim of a hat he must have taken from a dead soldier. He just sat there, watching her drown. She closed her eyes. It was fitting, she supposed. A just end. But then she heard the squelch of boots in the mud. She felt strong hands grip her good arm, hauling her unceremoniously from the water. He dragged her up the bank, away from the flood, and dropped her onto the wet gravel. Josie lay there, gasping like a landed fish, looking up at the man she had mocked. He stared back at her, his expression as hard and unforgiving as the landscape. And then, as the cold and the pain finally claimed her, the world went black. Josie awoke to the sound of drumming. It was a low, constant roar that seemed to come from the earth itself. Her first thought was that her head was pounding from the whiskey, but this was different. This was outside her. She was not in the mud. She was not in the rain. She was lying on a dry patch of sand, and she was warm. A small, smokeless fire crackled a few feet away, its heat a blessing against her soaked clothes. She was in a cave, a shallow scoop in the high rock wall of a ravine. Outside the mouth of the cave, a solid gray sheet of water fell from the sky, and far below, she could hear the grinding roar of the flood, a brown serpent of churning water and uprooted trees. Then the pain hit her. It was not her head, it was her left arm. A deep, sickening, fiery agony radiated from her shoulder, making her nauseous. She tried to push herself up with her right hand, and that was when she saw him. He was sitting on the other side of the fire, his back against the stone wall. Taza. He was watching the flames. Not her, his profile carved by the flickering light. He was perfectly still, as if he were a part of the rock himself. His clothes were damp, but he seemed untroubled by the cold. The memory of the flood crashed back into her. The wagon, the water, Trooper Evans, the sickening crack of the boy's head on the rock. Mr. Pike, swallowed by the mud, her horse screaming, and this man, on the bank, watching her. She was bruised, she was furious, and she was terrified. "Where am I?" she demanded. Her voice came out as a dry croak. "What have you done to me?" Taza did not look at her. He gave no sign that he had heard. He continued to stare into the fire, his expression unreadable, impassive. "Answer me," Josie snapped, her fear turning to her familiar, brittle anger. "Did you bring me here to kill me? Is this your revenge?" His silence was a heavy blanket, smothering her words. It was more unnerving than any threat. She tried to move, to scramble away from him, but the moment she put weight on her left arm, a white-hot spike of pain shot from her shoulder to her fingertips. She cried out, a sharp, involuntary gasp, and fell back onto the sand. Only then did he move. He turned his head and looked at her. His eyes were just as she remembered them from the mess hall, cold, dark, and empty. He did not speak. He simply lifted his chin, gesturing toward her left arm. It was resting at an angle that was plainly, horribly wrong. The head of the bone was a prominent lump beneath the skin, pushing her sleeve out of shape. It was dislocated. Josie's stomach turned. She understood what came next. "No," she whispered, her anger vanishing, replaced by a cold dread. Do not touch me." He ignored her. He rose in one fluid motion, without using his hands, and moved around the fire. He was not fast, but he was purposeful, and she had nowhere to go. She tried to push herself backward with her good arm and her heels, but she only hit the cold stone wall of the cave. "Please," she begged, the word thin and reedy. "Do not. I will fix it myself." He knelt beside her. His presence was overwhelming in the small space. He smelled of rain and cedar smoke and the wet earth. He wasted no time on words. His left hand, strong and surprisingly warm, clamped down on her shoulder, his fingers digging in to find purchase on the bone. His grip was like an iron band. His other hand seized her wrist. Josie gasped. "Please, I am begging you." He did not look at her face. He just braced himself and pulled. It was not a pull. It was a precise, brutal, intelligent yank. There was a wet, sickening pop that seemed to echo inside her own skull. Josie screamed. It was not a civilized shriek. It was a raw, tearing animal sound of pure agony that blasted out of her, echoing off the cave walls, momentarily drowning out the sound of the storm itself. Tears exploded from her eyes, and her whole body went rigid. Then, as suddenly as it began, the sharp, grinding pain was gone. In its place, a profound, flooding ache settled into the joint. But it was better. The arm was back where it belonged. He released her, just like that. He let go of her shoulder and wrist and moved back to his side of the fire, settling into his exact same position, staring into the flames as if he had done nothing more than add a stick to the embers. Josie was left a wreck. She was sobbing. Great, shuddering gasps that tore at her chest, her body shaking violently from the shock and the residue of pain. She curled onto her good side, cradling her aching arm, and wept for the terror, for the agony, for the dead boy, for her whole, ruined life. It was a long time before the sobs quieted. She was exhausted, her throat raw. The fire crackled, the rain fell. Finally, she wiped her muddy face with the back of her good hand. "Why?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He did not move. "You saved me from the flood. You fixed my arm. Why?" She pushed herself up a little, wincing. "You hate me. I know you do. You should have left me in the river. It would have been justice." She stared at his profile, demanding an answer. "Was this it?" she pressed, her voice gaining a little of its old acid. "Was this the plan? Save me, fix me, just so you can have your proper revenge later, drag it out, is that it?" Taza remained perfectly still, his face a mask of stone. He offered her no word, no gesture, no answer at all. He had saved her life, had inflicted and relieved a terrible pain, and now he had erased her from his world again. The storm did not break. It settled in, a stubborn, gray misery that trapped them. The rain fell for 2 more days, a constant drumming sheet that turned the world outside the cave into a blurry, watercolor wash of brown and gray. The canyon floor below remained a roiling river. There was no leaving. The silence in the cave stretched, hour upon hour. It was the loudest silence Josie had ever known. It was filled with the things they could not say, the history that lay between them like a naked blade. Josie had nothing to do but watch him. She began to see things, not in a single moment, but in small, quiet observations that chipped away at the image she held of him. He was not a savage. He was a man of intense, almost painful economy. He never made a wasted movement. He never took a step that was not necessary. On the second morning, the rain had lessened to a drizzle. He slipped out of the cave, disappearing into the gray mist like a shadow. Josie felt a pang of panic. Was he leaving her? But he returned an hour later, his black hair plastered to his skull, carrying a small, dead rabbit. He had a pack, she realized, a small roll of oiled canvas he had kept dry. From it, he took a knife. He skinned and cleaned the animal with a few quick, practiced motions, his hands never fumbling. He spitted the meat on a green stick and roasted it over the fire. The smell of the cooking meat was dizzying. Josie had not eaten in 2 days. When it was cooked, he pulled the meat from the stick onto a flat rock he had warmed by the fire. He cut the small animal in half, taking 1 portion for himself and pushing the rock with the other half toward her. He shared it, equally. She ate with her fingers, wolfishly. The hot, gamey meat, the best thing she had ever tasted. He ate his own portion slowly, staring into the fire. She saw him mourn. She would wake in the deep of the night, when the fire was just a bed of glowing red embers. He would be sitting up, not sleeping. He would be staring out at the dark, rainy canyon. And his stillness was different from his waking stillness. This was not the impassive mask of the warrior. This was the heavy, settled stillness of grief. She could not see his expression in the dark, but she could feel it. It was a cold, desolate sorrow that filled the small cave. He was mourning something unseen, something so large and so deep that it had become a part of him. Her mind, idle and trapped, drifted back, away from the cave, away from Arizona. It drifted back to Boston, to the tall, cold house on Beacon Hill, to Alistair Finch. She had been 17 when she married him. Her father had arranged it all. A good match. Alistair was 40. A banker with a supposedly vast fortune and a network of important friends. Josie had been a commodity, traded for prestige. The marriage had been a cold, airless room from the very beginning. Alistair, with his soft hands and his whiskers that always smelled of brandy and sour cigars. He had been polite at first, treating her like a new, expensive doll. But the money, it turned out, was mostly gone. Bad investments, cards, horses. As the money dwindled, his politeness curdled. He drank more. He stopped coming to her bed. And then, in a cruel reversal, he blamed her for it. A man needs an heir. Josephine, it is a wife's primary duty. She remembered him standing over her in the parlor, his face slack and damp with sweat and whiskey. Barren, he had hissed, the word striking her like a snake. I married a barren, useless girl. What good are you to me? What good are you at all? He had made her feel hollow, worthless, a failure as a woman. Her sharp tongue, her defiance, the scandal with the senator. It had all been a desperate, clumsy attempt to prove she was alive, that she was something, even if it was something bad. She looked at the man across the fire. Taza. He had spoken no kind words to her. He had barely spoken at all. But he had protected her from the storm. He had set her arm. He had brought her food and shared it equally. He had not looked at her with contempt, or pity, or blame. He had, mostly, not looked at her at all. And yet, in his silent provision, he had shown her more basic, human decency than her own husband ever had. The storm finally broke on the third day. The rain stopped. The clouds began to part, revealing a bruised, purple sky. The roar from the arroyo below had quieted to a gurgle. Josie was sitting up, wrapped in a dry, coarse blanket from Taza's pack. Her shoulder was a universe of deep, purple-black bruises, but the ache was manageable. She was looking out at the canyon, at the newly carved walls of mud, the shattered trees. This place is terrible, she whispered, not to him, just to the air. The silence stretched. She expected him to say nothing, as usual. Then, his voice. It was low and rough, like stones grinding together. It was not always. Josie flinched, startled. He had not spoken a single word to her since he'd dragged her from the river. He was looking out, past her, at the canyon. This canyon, he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, is where my brother's blood was washed away by rains like these. The words hit her, knocking the air from her lungs. She stared at him. He was 19. Taza continued, his voice as gray as the wet rocks. He believed in peace. Your father, Colonel Monroe, sent a message for a peace talk. Right down there. He jested with his chin toward a grove of skeletal, ruined cottonwoods far below. I told him it was a trap, that the white man's treaty paper is made to be broken, but he wanted an end to the running. Taza's eyes were fixed on that distant spot. Your father's soldiers seized him. They hanged him from the big cottonwood. They left him there for 3 days. For us to see, for a warning. Josie felt the blood drain from her face. She remembered the whispers at the fort. Monroe taught them a lesson. She had not understood. She had not wanted to understand. I cut him down, Taza said. His body it was not his body. Then the rains came, like this one, and washed the ground clean. Josie finally understood. The deadness in his eyes at the mess hall. The profound, bottomless grief she had sensed in him by the fire. It was not abstract. It was his brother, murdered by her father. And she had stood in front of this man, in front of her father's officers, and made a drunken, vile joke about his prowess as a man. The mortification was so profound it made her physically sick. Her own shame seemed small and petty compared to this.
"My God,"
she whispered, her hand rising to her mouth.
I did not know."
It would not have mattered, he said, still not looking at her.
"Yes, it would have,"
she insisted, her voice cracking.
"It would have. What I said at the fort, it was monstrous. I was drunk. I was so angry. At my father, at those whispering women, at my whole life."
She turned to face him, desperate for him to look at her, to see that she was not that woman.
"I am sorry. Taza, I am so sorry for what I said."
He gave no reply. He did not move. He just sat, a wall of stone and grief. Her apology hung in the air between them. Useless, weightless. It could not bring back his brother. It could not undo her words. Later that night, the sky was clear. 1 billion stars glittered with a cold, desert brilliance. The fire was just embers, a faint red glow in the dark. The air was cold and clean. Josie could not sleep. Her apology felt hollow. She was wrapped in the blanket, her good arm hugging her knees. He was a dark shape on the other side of the embers, and she thought he was asleep. She whispered into the darkness, the words for herself, not for him.
"I never meant it. What I said about you—"
The silence of the high desert was absolute.
"I was married,"
she whispered, the words spilling out of her in a low, pained rush.
"To a man in Boston. He drank, and he blamed me for not having children. He said I was worthless, barren. He said I was no good, for anything, a failure."
She drew a shaky breath.
"When I said that at the fort, I was throwing his words, the words he used to hurt me. I threw them at you because you were strong, and everyone was watching. It was cruel. It was the only weapon I had, and I am so sorry."
A long, long silence. The embers pulsed faintly. She felt like a fool, confessing her deepest shame to the darkness. She had just closed her eyes, a hot tear leaking from the corner, when his voice came out of the blackness. It was so soft, it was barely more than a breath. "I know." Just 2 words, but they landed in her heart. A sudden warmth. He knew. He had hurt her. He understood. It was not forgiveness. It was something more. It was recognition. The next morning, the sun rose, blinding and bright, on a world that had been washed clean. The mud was already beginning to dry. Taza was ready to go. He had stamped out the fire. He wordlessly handed her a strip of dried meat from his pack and her horse's reins. He had found her horse, tethered on high ground, safe from the flood. The journey back was slow and brutal. The canyon floor was a ruin of boulders and debris. Josie was weak, and her body ached with every step. Her shoulder throbbed. He did not speak, but he helped her. He led her horse over the treacherous, slick rocks. When she stumbled, his hand shot out and gripped her good elbow, steadying her. His touch was firm, impersonal, and gone as soon as she had her balance. They walked for hours, climbing out of the ravine, up the canyon walls, onto the high mesa. The fort was a tiny, hazy smudge in the far distance. He stopped. He had brought her within sight of it. This was as far as he would go.
"I can make it from here,"
Josie said, her voice rough. He handed her the reins. She looked at the horse, then at him. His face was impassive again, the warrior's mask back in place. He would not, she knew, go anywhere near that fort. He would not face her father.
"Taza,"
she said, her throat tight.
"You saved my life."
He gave a single, slight nod. It was all the acknowledgement she would get. He turned to leave. "Wait," she called out, though she did not know what else to say. He stopped, looking back at her over his shoulder. The bright morning sun cast one side of his face in light, the other in shadow. He spoke first, his voice low and clear.
You are not who they say.
Josie stared at him.
He meant the whispers, the scarlet woman, the drunken fool. He had seen her at her worst, and he had seen her broken and afraid in the cave.
He held her gaze for a moment longer. But neither am I. He was not the chief of her joke. He was not the savage of her father's reports. He was a man mourning his brother. Before she could think of a reply, before she could even breathe, he turned. He did not walk into the trees. He seemed to melt into them. One moment he was a solid, undeniable presence against the bright sky, and the next, he was simply gone. Josie stood alone on the ridge, the horse's reins heavy in her hand, his final words echoing in the vast, empty silence. When Josie Monroe rode back into Fort Determination, she was barely recognizable. She was coated in a thick, drying layer of red mud. Her dress was ripped, her hair was a tangled mat, and she was slumped over the horse's neck, her left arm bound against her chest in a crude sling she had fashioned from her own petticoat. The sentry at the gate dropped his rifle, his mouth open.
Mrs. Finch, my God, what happened?
Josie did not answer. She just let the horse walk slowly, ploddingly, across the parade ground to her father's headquarters. She did not have the strength to dismount. She simply waited until a soldier, seeing her state, ran to help her down. She was taken to her father's office. He was standing behind his desk, a map of the territory spread out before him. He looked up when she entered, and his eyes, cold and gray, registered no concern, only annoyance. "Where is the wagon?" he asked.
Gone,
Josie said. Her voice was a dry, rasping sound. "And Trooper Evans, Mr. Pike?"
dead.
The colonel's jaw tightened. He disliked losing assets.
Report, Josephine, now.
Josie stood there, swaying slightly, the smell of the river and the mud filling the small, hot room. She had rehearsed the lie on the long walk back. She knew saying flood would invite questions about how she, a lone woman, had survived when 2 men and a mule team had not, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that speaking Taza's name would be her own death warrant, and his. "It was outlaws," she said, her voice flat. "In the narrow pass, north of the arroyo. They had the high ground, maybe 6 of them. They opened fire before we saw them. The wagon, it went over the side. Pike was shot first. Trooper Evans, he tried to give me cover. He tried to fight back. He was just a boy. He never had a chance. They took the horses and the supplies." She watched her father's face. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the map, his finger tracing the line of the canyon. He was calculating the cost, the lost rifles, the sacks of flour, the mules. "You are certain they were outlaws?" he asked. "Not Apache?" "They were white men," Josie said, the lie coming easily. "They wore dusters. They were yelling in English, cursing." Colonel Monroe tapped the map. "This is a complication. It will delay the surveyors." He finally looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her ruined appearance, her sling, the bruises on her face. He saw her not as a daughter who had survived a trauma, but as a failed component. "You have proven yourself to be a liability. Josephine, in Boston, and now here. You are a magnet for trouble."
"Father, a boy is dead,"
she whispered. "Soldiers die. It is their purpose." He walked to the window, staring out at the hot, white square of the parade ground. "I am sending you back east. There is a stagecoach leaving for San Francisco at the end of the week. You will be on it. From there, you will take a ship. I am washing my hands of you." He was dismissing her, not out of concern for her safety, but out of convenience. She was an embarrassment he no longer wished to manage. Josie said nothing. She felt a strange, cold calm settle over her. Back in Boston, this news would have devastated her. It would have meant a return to the whispers, the debt, the shame, the cold parlors. But now Boston was a ghost. Her old life was a ghost. The only thing that felt real was the memory of a dark ravine, the sound of the rain, and the feel of a strong hand setting her arm. The only real thing was the echo of 2 words spoken in the dark. "I know." "Yes, sir," she said. She was given a new tent, and a soldier brought her a bucket of water. The officers' wives watched from a distance as she scrubbed the mud from her skin. They did not offer help. They whispered. They saw the colonel's daughter, the pariah, return alone. Having lost 2 more men, she was bad luck. She was tainted. That night, Josie lay on her cot, her clean arm aching, her entire body a map of bruises. She was supposed to pack. She was supposed to fold her useless silk dresses and prepare for the long journey back to a life she despised. She thought of Alistair, her dead husband, and his accusations of her being barren. She thought of her father, who saw her as a liability. She was a thing to be managed, married off or shipped away. And then she thought of Taza, a man who had every reason to kill her. He had called her a fool, but he had also shared his food. He had seen her at her absolute worst, covered in mud and shame, and he had not turned away. He had told her, "You are not who they say, but neither am I." She would not go back to Boston. She remembered something. A few weeks ago, before the flood, when she had first been assigned to the school, there was an old Apache woman, Tana, who was allowed in the fort to do laundry for the officers. She was ancient, her face a web of deep lines. Most people ignored her, but Josie, in her own misery, had seen the old woman's quiet dignity. One day, Josie had given her a small piece of bread left over from her breakfast. The old woman had taken the bread, her black eyes studying Josie's face with a strange intensity. Then she had leaned in, her voice a dry whisper. "Your father is a man of iron and blood," she had said in perfect, low English. "This is no place for you. You have a different spirit." "I have nowhere else to go," Josie had replied. Tana had touched her arm. "If you must run, run to the Shikis Ian, the people of the woods. They live in the high canyons. Ask for the one named Taza." At the time, the name had meant nothing. Now, it was everything. Josie made her decision. It was not a rational choice. It was a leap into the void, a choice made by the last, unbroken part of her. She waited until after midnight. The fort was silent, breathing in the cold desert air. She did not pack her dresses. She put on her most practical skirt and blouse, and her sturdiest boots. She stole a thick wool blanket from the quartermaster's tent. She slipped into the mess hall kitchen, dark and smelling of stale bread, and took a full loaf, a canteen of water, and a small, sharp skinning knife. She walked, not ran, toward the main gate. The sentry was a young man, slumped against the post, his hat tipped over his eyes. He was asleep. Josie slipped past him, a shadow in the moonlight. She did not look back. She walked out of the fort, out of the box of her life, and into the vast, dangerous, open dark of the hills. She walked all night, guided by the silver light of the moon. She headed toward the high ridge where Taza had left her. Her shoulder ached, and her legs were weak, but she did not stop. Every snap of a twig made her jump. Every hoot of an owl sounded like a warning. This was not the tamed wilderness of Massachusetts. This was a land that could kill you with its heat, its cold, its animals, and its men. By dawn, she was exhausted. Her feet blistered. She found a small overhang of rock and collapsed, sleeping for a few hours in the growing warmth of the morning. She walked for another day, finishing the bread and the water. She was lost. The hills all looked the same. The ridge she thought she recognized was just another pile of rocks. She was terrified, and for the first time, she thought she might die. A different kind of death. An anonymous death, from thirst. On the third morning, she was struggling up a dry, rocky wash when they found her. They did not make a sound. One moment she was alone, and the next, 4 Apache warriors were standing on the rocks above her. They were young, their faces hard, their eyes narrowed. They were not Taza. She recognized one of them, Hania, the young, angry warrior who had been at the fort that night, who had looked at Taza with such impatience. "The colonel's daughter," Hania said in heavily accented English, his voice dripping with contempt. Josie's heart hammered against her ribs.
"I am not here to spy. I am looking for Taza."
This was the wrong thing to say. Hania's face darkened with rage. He barked an order in Apache. Two of the warriors slid down the rock face and seized her. They were rough. One grabbed her good arm. The other grabbed her injured one, twisting it. Josie cried out in pain. They dragged her up the wash. Hania grabbed the knife from her belt and threw it away. They tied her hands in front of her, lashing her good wrist to her injured one. The pain was blinding, and she bit her lip to keep from screaming again. They debated. Hania spoke, his voice sharp and fast, gesturing at her, then making a cutting motion across his own throat. He was arguing to kill her. He was telling the others she was a spy, or a trap sent by her father. Another warrior, older, calmer, shook his head, arguing back. Josie stood there, bound and trembling, understanding nothing but the universal, terrifying language of violence. She was going to die here, in this ditch, at the hands of these men. Then, silence. Hania, who had been in the middle of a furious sentence, stopped. His body went tense. The other warriors turned, their eyes wide. Taza was standing on the ridge above them, his horse behind him. He had appeared from the silent rocks, a ghost in the morning sun. He did not speak, he just looked down, his face a mask of cold anger. The warriors who held Josie let go of her arms. Hania looked down at the ground, his jaw tight with defiance and shame. Taza slid down the rock face, his movements fluid and certain. He did not look at Josie. He walked directly to Hania. He spoke, his voice not loud, but low and lethal. The Apache words were like the crack of a whip. Hania flinched, but held his ground. He spat back a reply, gesturing at Josie. "She is a white woman, the killer's daughter." Taza's hand flashed out and he struck Hania across the face, a hard, open-palmed blow that snapped the warrior's head to the side. The silence that followed was absolute. Taza was the chief. He had been challenged, and he had answered. Hania's eyes blazed with hatred, but he said nothing more. Only then did Taza turn to Josie. He looked at her bound hands, her pale, terrified face. His expression was impossible to read. It was not kindness. It was a deep, weary anger. He pulled his own knife from its sheath. He stepped forward and, with one clean slice, cut the rawhide ropes. Josie cradled her throbbing arm, tears of pain and relief stinging her eyes. "You are a fool, Josephine Monroe," he said, his voice hard. "You are a fool to run from your people. You are a greater fool to come to mine." He turned and spoke to the warriors. It was an order. Then he started walking, not looking back to see if she followed. They walked her to the rancheria, the hidden encampment. It was nestled in a high canyon, invisible from below, protected by pine trees and sheer rock walls. When they entered the camp, everything stopped. Dozens of faces turned to her. Women who were scraping hides, children who were playing with dogs, old men who were sitting in the sun. Their chatter ceased. The only sound was the wind in the pines. Their eyes were not curious. They were full of a cold, profound hatred. This was the daughter of the man who had hanged their sons and brothers. This was the white woman from the fort, the one who had mocked their leader. Josie felt her skin crawl. This was worse than the officers' wives. This was generations of real, earned hatred, and it was all pointed at her. Taza spoke, his voice loud, echoing across the small clearing. He announced something. Josie could only guess. "She is not to be harmed. She is under my protection." It was a shield, but a thin one. The women hissed as she passed. The warriors looked through her. The children, their black eyes wide, ran and hid behind their mother's skirts. Taza led her to a small, isolated teepee on the very edge of the camp. It was old, the hide patched in several places. "This is yours," he said. He tossed a single, worn blanket inside. "Do not leave it after dark. Do not speak to anyone. Do not go near the horses." "Taza, You are not a guest," he cut her off, his voice flat. "You are a prisoner. My prisoner. It is the only way I can keep Hania from killing you." He turned and left her there, alone, at the edge of a world that despised her. The first few weeks were a special kind of hell. She was invisible. She was given a small portion of food each day, a handful of corn, a piece of dried meat, but no one spoke to her. If she walked to the stream to get water, the women who were washing clothes would stop, gather their things, and leave, as if she carried a plague. She was useless, a Boston lady with one good arm. She did not know how to cook on a fire. She did not know how to mend a moccasin. She was a burden. She realized, with a cold certainty, that if she was a burden, she was disposable. She had to make herself useful. She started with the simplest, hardest tasks. She used her good arm to gather firewood, hauling it back to her teepee, and then taking the extra to the communal fire. The women ignored her, but they used the wood. She hauled skins of water from the stream, her bad shoulders screaming in protest. Her body, soft from her Boston life, began to change. The sun browned her skin. Calluses formed on her good hand. Her arm, no longer in the sling, healed the muscles in her back and legs. Weak from years of sitting in parlors, grew hard. One afternoon, she saw a woman, Nellin, whose young son had fallen from a rock and sliced his leg open. The cut was deep, bleeding badly. Nellin was panicked, pressing herbs into the wound, but the blood kept coming. Josie ran to her teepee. She ripped a long, clean strip from the last of her fine linen petticoats. She ran back and, before the woman could protest, knelt. She pushed Nellin's hands aside and wrapped the strip tightly above the wound, tying it with a stick and twisting a tourniquet. The bleeding slowed, then stopped. Nellin stared at her, her eyes wide with suspicion, but also, for the first time, something other than hate. The old woman, Tana, the one from the fort, had been watching. She hobbled over, her face a mask of wrinkles. She grunted, looking at Josie's work. She then pointed at a dusty green plant growing nearby. "Yarrow," she said the Apache word. She made a crushing motion with her hands. "For the blood." It was the first lesson. From that day, Tana began to teach her. A word here, a gesture there. She showed Josie which roots to dig for pain, which leaves to boil for a fever. Josie learned to listen, to watch. She learned to ride bareback, a young boy, amused by her clumsiness, gave her an old, stubborn mare. She fell. She fell again. The entire camp watched her, some laughing openly. But she got up, her skirt covered in dust, and climbed back on. She learned to grip with her knees, to move with the horse, not against it. She was no longer the colonel's daughter. She was becoming something else. Taza kept his distance. He was the chief, and he had other, more pressing concerns. His people were hungry. The soldiers were encroaching. Hania's anger was a poison in the camp. But at night, he would come. He would appear at her small fire, a dark shape against the stars. He would sit, not close, but just within the circle of light. At first, they sat in silence, just as they had in the cave. But the silence was different now. It was not empty. It was filled with the shared knowledge of the day, the life of the camp. Then he began to speak. He taught her words, and the people. Goju, the word for harmony, for beauty, for the right way to live. One night, the moon was a sharp sliver in the sky. He had been watching her as she mended a tear in her blanket, her stitches clumsy but strong. "You should not have come here," he said, his voice low.
"I had nowhere else to go,"
she answered, not looking up.
This is not a life for you. It is a hard life, a life of running. Soon the snows will come, then the hunger. It is better than the life I had.
He looked into the fire, his face full of shadows.
Before Naka was hanged,
he said, his voice so quiet she had to lean forward.
I believed your father.
Josie stopped her sewing.
You believed him?
I believed peace was possible. I believed we could share this land, that words could stop bullets. He picked up a stick, tracing a line in the dust. I was a fool. Like my brother. He believed it to his death. I believed it until I cut him down. You are not a fool, Taza. He looked up at her, and his eyes were filled with a raw, painful conflict.
When I see you,
he whispered, I am a fool again. My people look at you and see the daughter of their killer. My mind sees a white woman who will betray us. But my spirit, it is betraying my people. He looked away, back at the fire. You make me remember the man I was before the hanging. The man who believed in words. And that man is dead. The tension in the camp finally broke a week later. Hanya, his anger festering, had been drinking Tizwin, a native corn beer. He was drunk, and he was angry. He stood in the center of the camp, shouting, challenging Taza's leadership. He accused Taza of being weak, of consorting with the white woman.
He lets a snake sleep in our camp,
Hania yelled, pointing at Josie, who was watching from her teepee.
She has softened his mind. He is no chief. He is a woman, like her.
Taza walked out to face him, his expression calm, his hands loose at his sides. He spoke in a low, reasoning tone.
Hania, enraged, shoved Taza hard in the chest.
It was a terrible insult, a public, physical challenge to the chief. The camp went silent. Warriors reached for their knives. Before Taza could react, before anyone could move, Josie ran. She did not think. She acted on pure, protective instinct. She ran from her teepee and stepped directly between the two men. She put her hand on Hania's chest, pushing him back.
No,
she yelled, her voice ringing out. The world stopped. Hania was so stunned he froze, staring at her. A woman, a white woman, had dared to touch him, to interfere. Taza's reaction was instant. He grabbed Josie by her good arm and yanked her backwards so hard she fell to the ground. The move was violent, shocking. He turned on Hania. He did not shout. He spoke in Apache, his voice a blade of ice, a lethal command. Every word was a cut. Hania, shamed, drunk, and now utterly defeated by Taza's cold fury, visibly shrank. He looked at the ground, then turned and stalked out of the clearing, disappearing into the trees. The crisis was over. Later, the camp was quiet, the tension thick. Taza came to her teepee. He was furious. He ripped the flap open and stood staring down at her. You will never do that again, he breathed, his voice shaking with rage. Do you understand me? You are nothing here. You have no voice. You do not stand between me and my warriors. Josie scrambled to her feet, her own anger rising.
He was insulting you. He was challenging you. I will not stand by and let him. You will stand by, Taza roared, taking a step toward her. You will do nothing. You do not understand our ways. You could have started a blood feud. You could have gotten us all killed with your white woman foolishness. Then teach me, she shouted back, jabbing a finger at his chest. Do not just hide me here and talk to me in the dark. What am I to you, a prisoner, a pet? Why did you let me stay?
The words hung between them, raw and dangerous. He was breathing hard, his fists clenched. His anger was a physical thing in the small tent. But as Josie stared up at him, defiant and unafraid, she saw the anger in his eyes shift, like clouds passing over the sun. It was not just anger. It was confusion. It was fear.
You are a fool, Josephine Monroe, he whispered, his voice suddenly hoarse. A brave, stupid, white woman fool.
He reached up, his hand rough from reins and knives. He meant to scold her. He meant to push her away. But his hand stopped. It hovered, trembling slightly, and then it settled on her cheek. His touch was a shock, a brand. His thumb moved, brushing a smudge of dust from her skin. All the anger, all the hate, all the grief of the past year seemed to drain away, leaving only this man, this woman, this impossible, silent understanding. He looked at her mouth. She looked at his. He leaned down. He kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was not a kiss of love. It was a kiss of frustration, of desperation, of two broken people colliding in the dark. It was the end of his hate and the beginning of something far more dangerous. He kissed her, his hand tangled in her hair, and in the absolute hush of the tent, the world tilted on its axis and began to spin in a new, terrifying direction. That first kiss was not the end of the anger. It was the beginning of it. When he pulled back, they were both breathing hard, staring at each other in the dim light of the teepee, horrified and alive. He had crossed a line. She had let him. He had tasted the salt of her skin, and she had felt the rough, desperate grip of his hands. He turned, his back rigid, and left the tent without a word, leaving her shaking. For 3 days, he did not come to her fire. He did not look at her. The camp felt the tension. Taza was a storm cloud on the horizon, silent and brooding. Josie, in turn, felt a cold knot of dread. She had not just broken a rule, she had shattered it. She had pulled the pin on something terrible. On the 4th night, the air was sharp with the first real chill of autumn. She was huddled in her blanket, the fire almost dead. When the tent flap moved, he was there, a dark shape in the darkness. He did not speak. He did not have to. He just came to her, kneeling on the hard-packed earth. Their secret relationship was not built on words. It was built in the deep, cold hours before the dawn. When the camp was asleep and the world was theirs, he would slip into her small teepee, or she, growing bolder, would creep to his, a ghost in the shadows. It was a tender thing, born from violence, after a lifetime of being treated as a bargaining chip by her father, or as a failed, barren object by her husband. Josie had never known this. Taza's hands, which she had seen skin a deer and strike Hanya with brutal force, were slow with her. He touched the bruises on her arm, long since faded, as if he could still feel the pain he had inflicted in the cave. He traced the line of her jaw, the sharpness of her collarbone. He looked at her, truly looked at her, in the faint light of the dying embers. And it was desperate. They came together with a force that was almost like grief, a silent, frantic acknowledgement that this was stolen, that this was wrong in the eyes of everyone they knew, that it could not last. They made love with the canyon wind whistling outside, a world of hate on either side of them. And for a few hours, they were just a man and a woman, warm and hidden. They were wordless, because words were from the two worlds that wanted to kill them. Their bodies, however, spoke a plain and simple truth. In the pale, gray light of the false dawn, she would slip away. One morning, as she pushed aside the flap of Taza's larger wickiup, she nearly collided with a woman. It was Eshki, a tall, strong woman whose husband had been killed in the same skirmish that took Taza's friend, Dasoda. Eshki's face was hard, and her eyes missed nothing. She was carrying water from the stream. She stopped, her gaze dropping from Josie's face to the flap of Taza's tent, then back to Josie. Josie's hair was loose, her mouth slightly swollen from his. She was wearing her own clothes, but she smelled of Taza's fire, of him. Eshki said nothing, her black eyes filled with a cold, absolute contempt. She did not just see a white woman. She saw a betrayal. She saw the chief, her chief, lying with the daughter of their greatest enemy. She spat on the ground at Josie's feet and walked away, her back straight. The secret was out. It was not a secret that could be spoken, but it spread through the camp like smoke. The whispers stopped. The glaring began. The other women, who had begun to show Josie a grudging tolerance, now looked at her with renewed hatred. Nalin, the woman whose son she had helped, would no longer meet her eyes. Tana, the old woman, just shook her head, her expression one of deep, profound sorrow. Taza's authority, already strained, began to crack. Hania and his warriors now openly questioned him. They did not challenge him to a fight. Taza's blow had settled that. But they defied him in small ways. They were slow to follow orders. They held their own councils, their voices low and angry. How could a man lead them against the white soldiers when he slept with a white woman? How could he make clear-headed war when his mind was fogged by the enemy in his bed? Taza, the great chief, was compromised. The world outside the canyon was moving, too. A trader named Silas Croft, a man who made his living selling overpriced flour and watered-down whiskey to the prospectors, was running a line of traps far north of the fort. He owed Colonel Monroe a great deal of money and paid his debt in information. He was scouting a new pass when he saw them. 2 women, on foot, digging for roots on the side of a mesa. One was an old Apache woman. The other, her skin browned by the sun, her hair tied back in a crude Apache fashion, was white. Silas lifted his spyglass. He stared for a long, hard minute. He had been at the fort the night of the party. He had heard the joke. He had heard the story of her being lost in the flood. Then the lie about the outlaws. He lowered the glass, a slow, greasy smile spreading across his face. It was her, the colonel's daughter, Josephine Monroe, alive and living with the Apache. He rode his horse half to death getting back to Fort Determination. He was shown into the colonel's office immediately. "Colonel Monroe," he said, pulling off his hat, his voice breathless. "That daughter of yours, the one you said was going back east." Monroe's eyes went flat and cold. "What about her?" "She is not gone, sir. She is alive. I saw her with my own eyes, not 3 hours ago, up in the high canyons. She is with them. She is with Taza." The silence in the office was absolute. Silas Croft suddenly felt a chill, though the room was hot. Colonel Monroe did not rage. He did not shout. He simply placed his hands flat on the map on his desk. His face became a mask of pure, cold fury. This was not a rescue mission. His daughter had not been captured. She had chosen. She had defected. She had shamed his name, his uniform, and his blood. She had willingly gone to the bed of the savage who defied him. "She is not my daughter," Monroe said, his voice quiet, which was more terrifying than a roar. "She is a traitor, and she will be treated as one. You will tell no one of this, Mr. Croft. You will, however, show my captain exactly where you saw her." The air in the rancheria grew heavier. The warriors were cleaning their rifles. The women were packing food into small, easy-to-carry bundles. They were preparing to move, to run. That night, Taza did not come to her. She went to his wickiup. He was sitting, sharpening his knife, his face carved from stone.
"They are coming, are they not?"
Josie asked, her voice low.
"My father?"
He did not look up from the whetstone. "Yes." "What will happen?" "We will run."
"And what about me?"
she pressed, her hands twisting in her skirt. "Taza, what happens to me if I stay?" He finally stopped. He looked up at her, and his eyes were full of the pain she had seen in the cave, the pain of his brother. "If you stay, Josephine," he said, his voice heavy, "I cannot protect you."
"But I am with you."
"You are white," he said, the words a flat, hard fact. "When the soldiers come, my people will fight. They will be blind with rage and fear. They will not see you. They will see the color of your skin. They will see the daughter of the man who is killing them." He stood up, his presence filling the tent. "They will kill you, or the soldiers will find you, and they will see you as a traitor. They will kill you too. There is no place for you, here or there." He was telling her to go, to save herself. "I am not leaving you," she said, her voice shaking but firm.
This is not love, Josie. This is war,
He said, his voice harsh.
Generations of hate are riding toward this canyon. Are this what we have? It is fragile. It is a thing of the night. It cannot survive the day.
It will, she insisted, stepping toward him. I will not run. His face twisted in anguish. He gripped her shoulders. Then you will die. Do you not understand? My love cannot stop a bullet. Before he could say more, Hania ripped the tent flap open. He was not alone. The elders of the camp were with him. They looked at Taza, and then at Josie, their faces hard. We must talk, Hania said to Taza, ignoring Josie completely. They went to the central fire. Josie followed, standing in the shadows, where she was not wanted, but where she could hear. The soldiers will be here by dawn, Hania said, his voice clear and logical in the cold night air. Monroe wants his daughter. This is why he comes. An old man, Chittister, nodded. It is true. He does not hunt us. He hunts her. So we give her to him, Hania said, his voice reasonable. We send her out with a white flag. We leave her at the canyon mouth. He will take her, and he will have his prize. He will have no reason to attack. He will leave us in peace. Josie's blood ran cold. They were debating her life, surrendering her. It is one life, Hania pressed, looking at the elders. One white woman, for the lives of our children, for our wives. It is a fair trade. Taza, who had been listening, his arms crossed, finally spoke. His voice was dangerously quiet. No. Hania stared at him. No? It is the only way. She has brought this curse on us. No, Taza repeated. I will not trade a human life for a lie. Do you think Monroe is a man of honor? Do you think he will take his daughter and just leave? The man who hanged Naka at a peace talk? He looked around the fire at the faces of his people. He will take her, and then he will attack. He will slaughter us for daring to touch her. He will use her as the excuse. We will gain nothing. We will only prove that we are cowards who trade women for safety. I will not do it. Then you sacrifice us all, Hania roared. For her! I sacrificed nothing. Taza's voice cracked like a rifle shot. We are Unde. We are the people. We do not run. We do not surrender our guests. And we do not fear that man. He pointed into the darkness, toward the fort. We fight. We fight for this land. We fight for our families. And we fight for our honor. We prepare to leave. But we will leave as warriors, not as cowards. His words settled the matter. The elders nodded. The debate was over. Taza had chosen. He had chosen war. He had chosen her. Josie ran back to her tent, her heart pounding with a terrible mixture of love and fear. It was not dawn. It was hours before. A single shot. The sound was sharp, wrong, echoing up the canyon. A sentry. Then another shot, and another, and a yell. Soldados! They were here, now. Josie ran from her tent. The camp was in pure chaos. Women were screaming, grabbing infants. Children were crying. Warriors were grabbing rifles, running toward the mouth of the canyon. Josie! Taza's voice. He found her in the madness, grabbing her arm. Go! Take Tana and the children. Go up the high path. Hide in the rocks. Go! I am staying with you. You will go, he roared, his face a mask of terror for her. He shoved her toward the old woman, who was already herding a group of children. Josie started to run, but it was too late. The first wave of blue-coated soldiers was already in the clearing, firing their carbines. They were not trying to capture anyone. This was a massacre. Taza and his warriors formed a line, providing cover fire, letting the women and children escape. Josie saw Taza fighting. He was calm in the center of the storm, firing his rifle, dropping one soldier, then another. His friend, Dasoda, was beside him, reloading. A soldier on a horse charged, his saber raised. Taza fired, but the soldier shot first. The bullet struck DeSoto in the chest. He looked at Taza, his eyes wide with surprise, and fell backward. "No!" Taza yelled, a raw cry of grief. Josie, who had been frozen in horror near the edge of the clearing, saw it happen. She saw Taza kneel by his friend, and a soldier saw her. He was young, with a blonde mustache. He stopped, his rifle half raised. He recognized her. "Mrs. Finch!" he yelled. Then his face hardened. "It is her, the traitor! She is with them!" He raised his rifle. Taking careful aim, he was not going to capture her. He was going to execute her. Josie stared down the black hole of the barrel. She could not move. "Josie!" Taza's voice. He was no longer by DeSoto. He was moving. He was launching himself through the air, across the 10 feet that separated them. He hit her like a rock, knocking her to the ground, his body covering hers completely, shielding her from the bullet. She heard the thwack of the bullet hitting flesh. She heard him grunt, a deep, pained sound that was forced from his lungs. He collapsed on top of her, his full weight pressing her into the dirt. The world went silent. The gunfire seemed distant. All she could hear was her own heart and the sound of Taza's breathing, which was suddenly wet and ragged. "Taza?" she whispered. He did not move. "Get him!" Hania was there. He and another warrior grabbed Taza, pulling him off her. Taza's side was a dark, spreading stain of red. "He is hit!" Hania yelled. "We must go, now!" They grabbed the other wounded they could. They fled, half carrying, half dragging Taza, up the high path, the one Taza had told her to take. Josie scrambled after them, slipping on the rocks, her hands bleeding, her mind a blank wall of panic. They ran. They ran as the screams and the gunfire faded behind them. They climbed deep into the wild, into the high secret places where the horses could not follow. They stopped hours later, in a cleft of rock so high it touched the clouds. They laid Taza down on the cold stone. He was conscious, but his face was pale, covered in a sheen of cold sweat. The bullet was in his side, deep. Josie fell to her knees beside him. The other Apache were silent, their faces grim, as they tended to their own wounds. Tana began to search for herbs, but they all knew. It was bad. Josie sobbed, great, gulping, tearing sobs. She took his hand. It was cold. "Do not," she wept, her tears falling onto his face. "Do not you dare. Taza, do not leave me. You cannot leave me. I will not let you. Do not die. Please, please do not die." She was babbling, her English words meaningless to the others, but her tone universal. He was slipping, his eyes unfocused. He looked at her, his vision struggling to clear. He saw her face, the face of the white woman, the face of his enemy, the face of his love, streaked with his blood and her tears. His lips moved. His voice was a bare whisper, a puff of air. She had to put her ear to his mouth to hear him. "I hated you," he whispered, his voice rattling in his chest. "I hated you. Then I looked at you." He took a ragged, painful breath. "And I saw the end of my hate." His eyes closed. He went limp. He was still breathing, but only just. He was falling into the dark, and she was alone with him on the mountain. The Apache did not run. They vanished. The survivors of the skirmish, Hania, old Tana, Josie, and 3 other warriors, carried Taza deep into the mountains, moving up goat paths and sheer rock faces where the soldiers would never follow. They found a high, narrow cleft, a cave hidden by a curtain of ancient, wind-twisted pine. Here they laid him down, the first flakes of snow, a cruel, unseasonable warning of the winter to come, began to drift from the gray sky, melting on Taza's hot face. He was dying. The bullet was deep in his side, lodged against a rib. His breathing was a shallow, wet rattle. Hania looked at the wound, then at Josie. His face was a mask of grief and hatred. DeSoto was dead. His chief was dying, and it was all because of this white woman.
He is gone,
Hania said, his voice flat.
No,
Josie said. She was no longer crying. A cold, fierce clarity had settled over her. She had been a prisoner, a guest, a lover. Now she was a nurse.
He is not.
Tana, we need fire and water, boiled. Tana, her ancient face grim, nodded and went to work. Josie looked at Hania. We have to get the bullet out, now, or the wound will poison him.
And who will do this?
Hania sneered.
You?
Yes, Josie said. She pulled the small skinning knife she had kept, the one she stole from the fort. Hold him down. Hania stared at her, stunned by her audacity. But Tana returned, handing Josie a strip of clean, boiled cloth. The old woman looked at Hania and barked an order. Josie knelt beside Taza. His skin was gray. He was unconscious, lost to them. Taza, she whispered, stroking his damp hair. I am sorry. I am so sorry. She sterilized the knife in the small, hot fire Tana had built. She took a deep breath. She had field-dressed a rabbit. She had stitched a boy's leg. This was just flesh and blood. She could not think of it as him. She cut. Taza's body arched off the ground in a silent scream. His eyes flew open, but they were blind, seeing only the red world of his pain. Hania and the other warriors threw their weight onto his shoulders and legs, holding him fast. Josie's hand did not tremble. She blocked out the sound. The man. She probed the wound with her fingers, her hand covered in his blood. The bullet was slick, lodged against the bone. She used the tip of the knife, prying, her teeth grinding together. It came free, a small, ugly piece of lead. She dropped it on the rock with a click. Tana was ready, packing the wound with a mash of yarrow and juniper, the herbs that Tana said would fight the rot. Josie took a needle, a precious item from Tana's pouch, and sinew thread, and she began to sew the ragged edges of his flesh together. Her stitches were small and tight, just as she had been taught in the sewing circles of Boston. When it was done, she collapsed, her entire body shaking. The snow was falling harder now, a thick, silent curtain. The next 2 weeks were a blur of cold and fever. Taza did not wake. He slipped in and out of consciousness, muttering in his own language, his body burning 1 hour and shivering violently the next. Josie did not leave his side. She and Tana were a silent team. They kept the wound clean. They forced broth, made from a single scrawny squirrel Hania had managed to shoot, between his lips. Supplies dwindled to nothing. They were starving. The warriors grew restless, trapped on the mountain, their family scattered. Hania looked at Taza, then at Josie. He was the leader now, and he was faced with an impossible choice. Stay here and watch his chief die while his people suffered, or leave and find them. On the 10th night, he came to the fire where Josie sat, her body aching with cold, her eyes gritty from lack of sleep. We are leaving, Hania said. We will find the others. We will tell them their chief is dead.
He is not dead,
Josie whispered, her voice fierce. He is a ghost, and we cannot feed a ghost, or you. He looked at her, his expression not cruel, just exhausted. We leave at dawn. Go, Josie said. Find your people, but I am staying. Hania looked at her as if she were insane. You will die. The winter will kill you. Or the wolves. Then I will die. He stared at her, this strange white woman who would choose to freeze to death beside a dying Apache. He saw no fear in her eyes, only a stubbornness that matched his own. He gave a sharp, frustrated nod. He left a rifle, 1 handful of bullets, and a single blanket. At dawn, they were gone. Only Tana stayed. The old woman was too old to make the journey. She and Josie were alone on the mountain, with a dying man and the falling snow. Josie's mind, weakened by hunger and exhaustion, began to crack. She was dozing, her head slumped on her knees, when she heard his voice. Well, Josephine, you have certainly made a mess of things this time. She looked up. Alistair Finch was standing across the fire, his Boston suit immaculate, his whiskers neatly trimmed. He was brushing a snowflake from his lapel. "You are dead," she whispered. "Am I?" he sneered, his voice the one she remembered from his drunken nights. "I feel quite real, and I see you have found yourself another man to disappoint." He gestured at Taza's still form. "He does not look like much, rather grim. But then, you always had low tastes. And look at you, filthy, thin. You look like a common Irish washerwoman. Is this what your rebellion has earned you?" "Be quiet," Josie hissed, tears stinging her eyes. "I was right about you, was I not?" Alistair continued, his voice a smooth, cutting poison. "Barren, useless. You could not even give me a son, and now you cannot even keep this one alive. You fail at everything. Josephine, you are a failure as a wife, a failure as a woman." "I am not," she cried, the sound raw in the small cave. Tana, sleeping nearby, stirred. "He said I was barren," Josie whispered, rocking back and forth, the tears streaming down her face. She was talking to the ghost, to herself, to the unconscious man at her side. She crawled to Taza, grabbing his cold hand, pressing it to her cheek. He was wrong. "Taza, I was not barren. He was wrong." She was lost now, the past and present colliding. Taza was her confessor. "Alistair died," she whispered, her voice ragged. "A duel, over a card game or a woman. I do not know. I did not care. I was just relieved. My father was furious. The scandal. He locked me in the house. He said I was to see no one." She was shivering, the memory as cold as the snow. "But I had a secret I had hidden from Alistair, from everyone. I was pregnant. I was so sick with it. But I told no one. I was afraid. The night of the funeral, the pains started. I was alone, in that big cold house. I locked my bedroom door. It went on all night, and all the next day. So much pain. I thought I would die." She was sobbing now, holding Taza's hand as if he were her anchor. It was a girl, a tiny, perfect little girl, but she was quiet. She was so quiet, she never made a sound. She was blue. She was confessing the deepest, most buried shame of her life. "I held her," Josie wept. "I held her all night. She was so cold. In the morning, when the doctor finally came, I had hidden her. He said I was hysterical, that I had imagined it. But I knew I had failed her. I could not even keep my own baby alive." She laid her head down on Taza's chest, her body shaking. "I am not barren, Alistair. I am just cursed. Everything I touch, I kill," she cried until there was nothing left. The next morning, Taza's fever broke. Josie awoke from her exhausted slump to find Tana pressing a wet cloth to his forehead. His eyes were open. They were not clear. They were clouded with pain. But he was looking. He looked at Tana. Then he looked at Josie. His eyes were full of confusion. He did not know where he was. He saw her face, the Bosque woman, her face pale and stained with tears. "Naka?" he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "No, Taza," she whispered, her heart breaking. "It is Josie. You are safe." He closed his eyes, but he was breathing. The wet rattle was gone. Tana knew a place, a winter place, an old, abandoned trading post. 2 days' walk down the mountain, in a valley the soldiers did not know about. They could not stay in this cave. It took TM Josie and Tana, half-starved and weak, a full day to move him. They made a travois, a simple sledge, and they dragged him, inch by agonizing inch, through the snow, down the treacherous path. The trading post was a ruin, a shell of 4 adobe walls, its roof half caved in, but it had a fireplace. It was shelter. They spent the winter there, just the 3 of them. Taza, Josie, and Tana, It was a long, dark, quiet time. Taza healed, but slowly. The wound in his side would ache with the cold, a constant reminder. Josie hunted. Tana had taught her how to set snares. She caught rabbits, squirrels. She learned to shoot the rifle Hania had left. Learning to make every bullet count, she would bring back a small grouse, and they would boil it for soup, sharing it equally. 3 ways. Taza watched her. He was weak, confined to the pallet of furs Tana had made. He saw this white woman, this Boston lady, her hands now cracked and bleeding from the cold, her hair lank, her face thin from hunger, and she was working. She was hauling firewood. She was checking her traps. She was tending to Tana, who coughed in the night. She was keeping them alive. As his strength returned, they talked. The silence of the cave was replaced by the low murmur of voices by the fire. Tana, it turned out, spoke more English than Josie had ever known. She told them stories of the people, of the world before the whites. And Taza and Josie spoke of dreams. "When I am well," Taza said one night, staring into the flames, "we cannot stay. Hania will find us, or your father." "Where will we go?" Josie asked. "South, deep into the high mountains, the Sierra Madre. It is a place of no name. The soldiers do not go there. It is high and cold and hard, but it is free." "A place neither white nor Apache," Josie whispered. "A place just for us." He looked at her, and his eyes were no longer dead. They were clear and warm. "We would not be Unde, you would not be Bosk, we would be unnamed." It was a quiet, impossible dream, and it was the only thing that kept them warm through the long, frozen winter. Spring came. The snow melted, running in small rivers down the valley. The air was warm. Taza was whole. He was still thin, and his side bore a puckered, ugly scar. But he was strong. Tana, however, was weak. The winter had been too hard on her old bones. "You must go," Tana told them, her voice a dry rattle. "I will not leave these mountains. This is my home. I will die here." Josie wept, but she knew the old woman was right. They left her with wood and food. They walked out of the valley, Taza and Josie, hand in hand. The world was green and full of promise. They were unnamed. They were free. They had been walking for 3 days, following a stream, moving south. "I hear horses," Taza said, pulling her behind a boulder. They waited. 4 men rode into the clearing. They were not soldiers. They were scouts, hard-bitten, cruel men, wearing pieces of the army uniform mixed with buckskin. And leading them was Silas Croft, the traitor. Croft reined in his horse, sniffing the air. "I smell smoke," he said. They had been spotted. "Run!" Taza yelled, pushing Josie toward the trees. A shot rang out. Taza grabbed his rifle, firing back, giving her cover, but they were 4 to 1. Another shot, and Taza's rifle was knocked from his hand. The scouts swarmed them. Taza fought, a desperate, hand-to-hand struggle. He was still weak. They subdued him, slamming the butt of a rifle into his gut. They tied his hands. "Well, well," Silas Croft said, grinning, his teeth yellow. "Look what we got, boys, the chief himself." "Let him go!" Josie screamed, running at them. "He is done fighting! Let him go!" One of the scouts, a man with a scarred face, backhanded her, sending her sprawling into the dirt. "Shut up!" he spat, his tobacco juice landing near her face. "You shut your mouth, you squaw trash!" They dragged Taza and Josie all the way back to Fort Determination. The humiliation of her return was absolute. Her father, informed of the capture, gave orders for them to be marched across the parade ground at midday. Josie was tied by her wrists, forced to walk behind Taza. The entire fort came out to watch. The officers, the soldiers, the wives, who stood on the porches, their faces a mixture of horror and vindication. She was the thing they had always whispered she was, the traitor, the savage's woman. Josie held her head high. She met their stares. She felt no shame, only a cold, hard rage. She was taken to her father's office. Taza was taken to the jail, a small, windowless adobe shed used to hold drunken soldiers. Colonel Monroe was standing behind his desk. He looked at her brown skin, her Apache-style moccasins, her wild hair. He looked at her as if she were a piece of filth. "You have brought a stain upon my name that will never be washed out," he said, his voice a low, cold whisper.
"This is not about your name,"
Josie said, her voice shaking but strong.
"This is about a man's life. You have to let him go. He was not fighting. We were leaving. It was my fault. It was all my fault."
"Yes," her father said. "It was—" He walked to the window. "He is an Apache renegade. He is charged with murder, insurrection, and treason against the United States Army." He turned, his eyes like chips of ice. "And fornication. He will hang at dawn." Josie stared at him. The word hung in the air. "Fornication? That is not a military crime. It is when it involves a white woman and a savage. It is an act of defilement, an act of treason against your own blood." And then Josie saw it. She saw the truth. "You are not hanging him for treason," she whispered, a terrible, cold realization dawning on her. "You are hanging him for me. You cannot stand it. You cannot stand that I chose him over you, that I lay with him. You would rather see him dead and me publicly disgraced than admit to the world that your daughter, that your own blood would choose him." Colonel Monroe smiled. It was a terrible, thin-lipped smile. "You are not my daughter. You have no blood. You are dead to me. You died in that flood. Josephine, this creature they brought back is just some trash he left behind." He had pronounced her death sentence, and Taza's. Josie was locked in her old tent. A guard, a young corporal named Finn, was posted outside. He was a kind-faced boy who had, in her first weeks at the fort, always looked at her with shy, calf-eyed admiration. She sat on the cot, her mind racing. Dawn. She had until dawn. She heard the soldiers in the mess hall. They were celebrating. They were getting drunk on the whiskey her father had provided. She heard them laughing about the Indian lover and the chief. She waited. Hours passed. The fort grew quiet. She heard the guard. Corporal Finn, pacing outside, his boots crunching in the dirt. She called out, her voice soft, pleading. "Corporal? Corporal Finn!" He stopped. "Ma'am?" "Please, I am so cold, and I am so thirsty. Could I have just a cup of water?" He hesitated. "The colonel said no one is to speak to you." "Please, Corporal, you were always a kind man. Not like the others. Just some water. My father, he is a monster." She heard him sigh. He went away and returned a moment later, opening the tent flap. He held a canteen. He was young, and his face was full of pity. And he smelled of whiskey. He had been celebrating, too. "Here you go, ma'am." "Thank you, Finn." She took the canteen, and her hand brushed his. She held his gaze. "It is not right. What he is doing, you know it, do you not? He is killing an innocent man." "Ma'am, I cannot—" "They say he is hanging Taza for what I did. But I love him. Corporal, is that a crime? To love someone?" The young man was blushing, his mind clouded by the drink and her sudden, desperate intimacy. "No, ma'am, it ain't." "You are a good man," she whispered, touching his arm. "Not like my father. You have a heart." She looked down. "I will not even get to say goodbye." He was lost. He was drunk, and a beautiful, tragic woman was appealing to him. I have the keys to the jail, ma'am. I am on watch." "If only I could see him," she pleaded, "just for 1 minute, to say a prayer." "The colonel would have my hide." "He will never know. Finn, please, for the sake of a dying man. For me." He wavered. He was drunk enough to be brave, drunk enough to be foolish. "All right," he whispered. 1 minute, That is all. Then I lock you back in." He led her across the dark parade ground. The moon was a sliver, casting long shadows. He fumbled with the key, unlocking the heavy wooden door of the jail. "I will wait here," he said. Josie stepped inside. The shed was pitch black and smelled of filth. Taza was on the floor, his hands tied, his feet bound. He was awake. "Josie!" he whispered, his voice weak. She did not go to him. She turned back to the doorway.
"Thank you, Corporal."
As he leaned in, a sympathetic look on his face. She grabbed the tin cup of water she had brought from the tent and dashed it in his face. He sputtered, surprised, and in that second, Josie drove her knee, hard, into his groin. The soldier wheezed, all the air leaving his body, and folded. As he went down, Josie grabbed his rifle from his grasp. She did not know how to use it, but she reversed it, holding it like a club. He was already unconscious, slumping to the ground. "Josie!" Taza hissed. She ran to him, pulling the skinning knife, which the soldiers, in their arrogance, had not thought to search a woman for, from her boot. She cut his ropes. "Can you ride?" she asked.
"I can,"
he said, his voice grim. They slipped out. The fort was asleep. They moved like shadows toward the stables. She saddled 2 horses, her hands shaking but quick. She knew how to do this now. They led the horses to the gate. They swung into the saddles. "Halt!"
A sentry, on the wall, not asleep. He had seen them.
"Halt, or I will fire!" Josie kicked her horse, screaming, "Ride! Taza, ride!" They bolted, charging out of the open gate. A shot rang out in the night. A line of pure, white-hot fire sliced across her left shoulder. She screamed, a sharp, tearing cry of pain, nearly falling from the horse. But she held on. She clung to the horse's mane, the blood hot and wet, running down her arm. They rode, flat out, into the darkness. They did not look back. They rode under the moonlight. 2 wounded, desperate figures, fleeing for their lives. Taza was riding low, his own wound surely torn open again, his face a mask of pain. And Josie, her shoulder on fire, her heart broken, was crying. They were not tears of joy. They were tears of rage and pain and the terrible, terrible cost of being free. They did not ride fast. They rode hard. They rode until the horses were slick with foam and blood, their lungs screaming. Josie clung to the mane, her left arm useless. The bullet's fire spreading from her shoulder, down her back. Taza rode beside her, a grim shadow, his own hand pressed to his side, where his wound had torn open. The moon set, and the sun rose on a landscape of pure, burning rock. The horses could go no further. They stumbled, their legs trembling. Taza pulled them into a shallow arroyo, out of sight. "We walk from here," he said, his voice a dry rasp. He slid from the saddle, nearly falling.
"Walk where?"
Josie was dizzy with pain. "South." He slapped the horses on their flanks, sending them running, scattering their tracks. Then he grabbed Josie's good hand. "South, until we can walk no more." They fled south, crossing a burning yellow desert that had no name. They were 2 wounded animals, hunted and running. They moved at night, hiding in the shadows of boulders during the day. The sun a physical weight, trying to crush them. The patrols were everywhere. They saw the distant dust of cavalry, the glint of a spyglass on a high ridge. They had to change direction, moving deeper into the barrens, where no soldier would follow. And nothing lived. Josie's wound became infected. The heat and the filth worked their way into the raw flesh. Taza, his own side leaking blood, had to tend to her. He found a broad-leafed yucca. He heated his knife in the small, smokeless fire he made with a hand drill, and he lanced the wound. Josie did not scream this time. She just gritted her teeth, the sweat pouring from her face, as the poison ran out. He found a barrel cactus, and with the last of his strength, He split it open. The pulp inside was slimy and bitter, but it was water. It was life. They ate it, gagging, but they ate. They survived on cactus pulp and rainwater, sipped from hollows in the rock. Josie's fine Boston boots, the ones she had worn to flee the fort, fell apart. The soles flapped and then tore off. She walked on a pair of bloody, blistered feet.
I cannot,
she whispered, one night, collapsing onto the sand.
Taza, leave me. I am done.
He stood over her. He was thin, a skeleton of the man he had been, his face all harsh angles and burning eyes. He reached down and pulled her to her feet, his grip like iron. You said you would not run, he said, his voice low.
You were wrong. We run until we are free, or we are dead. Get up.
He pulled her on. She did not walk with her legs. She walked with the core of her will, that same stubborn, angry core that had made her mock him in the mess hall, that had made her stand up to Hania, that had made her free him from the jail. After how many days? She did not know. The world was a haze of heat and pain. They came over a high ridge, and they saw it. It was not a mirage. It was a cross, a small, white cross on a crumbling bell tower. An abandoned Catholic mission. It was a ruin, the adobe walls melting back into the earth. But there was a small patch of green, a garden, and a thin wisp of smoke, coming from a chimney. They stumbled toward it. A figure appeared in the arched doorway. It was a woman, ancient and small, dressed in the black, faded habit of a nun. She was old, her face as wrinkled as a dried apple, her skin the color of the earth. She watched them come, these two broken, filthy people, one white, one ND, clinging to each other. She did not look surprised. She looked as if she had been waiting. She did not speak. She had no English. Taza had no Spanish. There was no need for words. She raised a hand, not in fear, but in welcome. She led them inside, to a small, cool, clean room. She brought a basin of water, real water, cool and sweet from a deep well. She brought goat's milk and fresh bread, baked with corn. They ate like starving wolves, and she watched them, her dark eyes full of a peace that was as vast as the desert. She brought clean rags and herbs. She did not ask about their wounds. She simply cleaned them. She washed Josie's shoulder, her touch light as a feather. She unbound Taza's side, washing away the grime, and repacking the wound. That night, they slept on a real pallet, a straw mattress. They slept for a day and a night. When they awoke, the old nun had laid out food for them. They stayed there for a week, a quiet, holy week of silence and healing. The nun would work in her garden. She would pray in the ruined chapel. She would milk her 2 goats. She offered them shelter, and she asked for nothing. She did not judge. On the last night, Taza was looking at Josie. His strength returned, the health coming back to his face. She was still thin, but her eyes were clear. She was no longer the colonel's daughter. She was no longer the ghost in the cave. She was the woman who had walked through fire with him. The nun saw them. She saw the way their hands found each other in the twilight. She came to them. She took Taza's hand. She took Josie's hand. She placed Josie's hand in his. Then she laced their fingers together. She held their joined hands in her own, and she made the sign of the cross over them, her lips moving in a silent Spanish prayer. She blessed their union, the only person in the entire world who had looked at them and seen. Not a scandal, not a traitor, not an enemy, but just 2 people. Josie wept. Taza, his face full of a new, quiet awe, bowed his head. That night, the storm came. It was not a flood. It was a celebration. The sky split open with a crash of thunder, and the lightning lit the desert, turning the night to day. Taza grabbed Josie's hand. Come. Out there, it is madness. Yes, he said, a rare, true smile touching his mouth. It is. He pulled her out of the mission, into the courtyard. The rain came down in a torrent. A glorious, cleansing, cold rush. It washed the last of the dirt and the blood from their bodies. It plastered their hair to their skulls. They stood in the center of the ruin, the lightning flashing above them like a beacon. "In my world," Taza shouted over the thunder.
"This is a blessing! This is life!" "Then let us marry ourselves,"
Josie yelled back. The words ripped from her, words she had not even known were there. He turned to her, his eyes blazing in the flash of light.
"I have no ring,"
she said, laughing, the rain pouring from her face.
"I have no fine dress. I have nothing."
"You have my life," he said, his voice low and fierce, cutting through the storm. "Josie Monroe, in my old life, I was a chief. I was hate. You are my Goju. You are my peace."
"And you are mine,"
she said, her voice breaking, the tears mixing with the rain.
"Taza, I was a ghost. I was a failure. You are the only thing that was ever true. In my father's world, I was his property. In my husband's world, I was his failure. In your world, I am just me."
"My wife," he said, the word a new, strange, wonderful sound on his tongue.
"My husband,"
she whispered. He kissed her. He kissed her under a sky of white fire and pouring rain. It was not a kiss of desperation. It was a promise. It was raw, and it was imperfect, and it was the most beautiful, truest thing that had ever happened. They left the next morning. The nun gave them a bag of bread, a skin of goat's milk, and 2 pairs of thick, rawhide sandals. She blessed them one last time, and they walked away, south, into the mountains. They found the high Sierra he had spoken of, a valley deep in the mountains of Mexico, where the air was thin and the snow lasted half the year. It was a hard place, but it was free. They found other Ende, other Apache families who had fled the reservations, who had run from the blue soldiers. They were not a war band. They were just survivors. And in this valley, Taza and Josie built a life. Years passed. The world below forgot them. Josie Monroe was a disgraced name, a ghost story whispered at Fort Determination. A traitor, an old ND man who moved between the worlds, found them one summer. He brought news. Colonel Monroe was dead. He had been leading a patrol and had been ambushed. Some said it was a rival officer, a man who hated his cold, ruthless ambition. Some said it was Hania, finally getting his revenge for Naka. Josie did not care. She heard the news, and she felt nothing. That man was a stranger from a different life. Her inheritance, the Boston money, was long gone, seized by the government, her name struck from the records. She was a traitor. She felt a lightness. The last chain had been broken. She was not Josie Monroe. She was Indicida, the white woman. But the Apache children, the ones she taught, called her Nachana, the healer. She had learned Tana's skills. She grew herbs. She delivered babies. She taught the children to read, using an old, tattered Bible she had found at the mission. She taught them the English letters, so they would know the words on the white man's paper, so they would not be tricked, as Naka had been. She became a legend in the small villages, a white ghost woman, with Apache fire in her eyes, who lived with the high mountain people. And Taza was no longer a war chief. He no longer wore paint. The deep, agonizing hate that had frozen his heart had thawed and washed away. He was a husband. He was a father to the children who had none. He hunted. He led the small community. He was, for the first time in his life, a man at peace. His eyes were not dead. They were clear, and they were full of his love for her. Their life was hard. The winters were brutal. The hunger was a constant companion. But it was their life. It was the unnamed life they had dreamed of. One night, the snow was just beginning to melt from the high peaks. A rider came into the valley, his horse exhausted. It was Hania. He was older, his face a web of scars, his eyes tired. He had survived. He looked at Taza. and he looked at Josie, and he gave a low, respectful nod. "They are coming. Taza," he said. "Who?" Taza asked, though he already knew.
"The soldiers, all of them. The war is over. They have taken the great chiefs. They are cleaning the mountains. Not just in Arizona. Here, they are rounding up all Ende. They are putting everyone on the trains, taking them east to a flat land, a place called Florida."
The end of the world. Taza's face, so long at peace, hardened into the old mask of the chief. His hand went to the knife at his belt. "We prepare. We run. We go higher." Josie, who had been listening, her heart growing cold and heavy, stepped forward. She put her hand on his arm. "No," she said. He looked at her, confused.
"Josie, they will kill us."
"No," she said again, her voice quiet, but as unmovable as the mountain. "We are done running. I will not run from my own people, and you will not run from yours. We are done." He looked into her eyes. He saw the girl from the stagecoach. He saw the woman from the cave. He saw the warrior who had freed him from jail. And he saw his wife. She was right. The dream was over. All that was left was how they met the end. He nodded. He took her hand. They walked, Hania following, to the edge of their valley. They did not prepare for war. They did not hide the children. They stood, hand in hand, as the sun began to set, and they waited. They came at dawn, a full company of blue-coated soldiers, their rifles ready, their faces grim. They fanned out, surrounding the small, peaceful village. A young captain, a man with a new uniform and pale, uncertain eyes, rode forward. He saw the Apache, and he saw the white woman standing beside the chief. He stopped, confused. The soldiers raised their rifles. The women in the village began to wail. Taza and Josie did not move. They stood tall, their heads high. "Ma'am?" the young captain called out, his voice shaking.
Are you a prisoner? We are here to rescue you."
Josie let go of Taza's hand. She took one step forward. She looked at the captain and at the line of rifles, and her voice was clear and loud, echoing in the mountain air. "This is my husband." Taza stepped up, standing beside her, a hand on her back. He looked at the captain. His voice was deep and proud. "This is my wife." The captain stared. The soldiers stared. Their orders were to remove all Apache. They had no orders for this. A white woman, married, willingly. Their rifles, which had been steady, wavered. This was not a renegade. This was not a savage. This was a man and his wife. The confusion was total. The captain, a boy following orders, did not know what to do. Josie lifted her chin. Taza put his arm around her, and, together, proud and unbroken, they began to walk. They walked past the line of soldiers, who did not raise their guns, not out of mercy, but out of a profound, paralyzing confusion. They walked, hand in hand, into the storm that was coming, and they did not look back. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We would love to hear your thoughts, so please leave a comment and tell us where you are listening from, so we can all connect. Do not forget to subscribe to the Wild West Campfire channel for more stories just like this.